The salvage ship cut through the darkness of space like a knife through silk. David Riley stood in the cargo hold, checking his equipment one more time before the descent. His suit was worn and patched in several places, bearing the marks of a dozen worlds explored and 100 dangers survived. He was not a young man anymore. His hair had turned gray at the temples, and his face carried the weathered look of someone who had spent most of his life among the stars. Today was different from all the other days. David could feel it in his bones. He had explored countless derelict ships and abandoned stations over the years, but something about this particular location called to him. The Dead Space Station orbited a planet that had been lifeless for millions of years. Nothing lived here anymore. Nothing had lived here for a very long time. David sealed his helmet and checked the pressure readings. Everything was normal. He activated the airlock and descended to the station's surface. The gravity here was almost non-existent, so he used magnetic boots to keep himself anchored to the metal floor. His flashlight beam cut through the thick darkness, revealing corridors caked with dust and debris. The station had been abandoned for so long that time itself seemed to have forgotten about it. He moved slowly through the corridors, his scanner beeping softly with every reading it took. Most of what he found was useless. Broken equipment, shattered displays, rotting furniture that crumbled to dust at the slightest touch. These were the remains of a civilization long gone, reduced to nothing but memories and rust. But as David went deeper into the station, he began to notice something strange. The architecture changed. The corridors became more reinforced. The walls were thicker. He was moving towards something important, something that the ancient builders had wanted to protect. His heart beat faster. The lower levels were blocked by massive sealed doors. David worked for hours, carefully bypassing the ancient locking mechanisms. His knowledge of old technology was extensive, earned through years of salvage operations. Finally, with a grinding sound that echoed through the empty corridors, the door slid open. David stepped inside and froze. Standing in the center of the chamber was a war android. It was enormous, nearly 8 feet tall, with a chassis of dark metal that gleamed despite the dust of ages. Its surface was scarred and pitted from countless battles. Weapons systems hung from its arms and shoulders, now inert and rusted. Its head was a masterpiece of engineering, with optical sensors that had once glowed with fierce intelligence. Now those sensors were dark and dormant. But the most remarkable thing was the faint blue light that pulsed from the android's chest, like a heartbeat struggling to continue. The power core was still active. Somehow, impossibly, this machine had survived all these millions of years in a state of deep dormancy. David approached slowly as if the android might wake up at any moment and attack him. He pulled out his portable scanner and began to analyze the machine. His hands shook slightly as he worked. What he was discovering defied everything he knew about android technology. The consciousness matrix was still intact. The neural pathways were preserved in cryogenic suspension. This was not simply a mechanical being on standby. This was a person frozen in time, waiting. Waiting for what, David did not know. He moved around the android, examining every detail. There was a name plate on the machine's shoulder, worn by time but still readable. Unit 7, it said, followed by military identification codes that David could not decipher. This android had fought in wars. Terrible wars, judging by the damage to its frame. David sat down on a nearby crate and stared at the machine for a long time. According to the salvage protocols he had been trained in, he should report this discovery to the Frontier Company headquarters. They would send a team to collect the android and study it. That was the proper procedure. But David found himself not wanting to follow the rules today. He had spent so many years collecting junk and scrap metal. He had found so many broken things that meant nothing. But this was different. This was something with history. This was something that had once been alive in its own way. The thought of letting some laboratory dissect it, study it, and ultimately destroy it made something inside David rebel. Without allowing himself to think too much about what he was doing, David began to work on the extraction process. He gathered cables and powered down the cryogenic systems carefully. He detached the android from its moorings and began the slow process of moving it toward the corridor. It took him 8 hours of hard physical labor. By the time he finally had the android secured on his ship, David was exhausted. He lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. He had no authorization to remove something like this from the station. If the company found out, they would fire him. Worse, they might prosecute him for theft. But as David drifted off to sleep, he found himself thinking about the android's consciousness matrix, still preserved in suspended animation. Somewhere inside that machine something was waiting. Something that had been waiting for millions of years. And David Riley had decided that he would be the one to wake it up. He had no idea what would happen next. He could not have predicted that his decision would lead to the most extraordinary discovery in human history. But as he lay there in the darkness of his ship, floating above a dead world, David felt something he had not felt in years. He felt hope. He felt like he was part of something larger than himself. The salvage operation had just begun, and everything was about to change. David Riley worked in the repair bay of his salvage ship for 14 hours straight before allowing himself a break. The android lay on the maintenance platform, its massive frame dwarfing everything around it. The work ahead of him was monumental. Most people would have said it was impossible. But David had never been one to listen to what others said was possible or impossible. He began with the power core. The blue light that had been pulsing weakly when he found Unit 7 had grown even fainter during the transport. David knew that if the core failed completely, the android's consciousness matrix would be lost forever. He worked with surgical precision, replacing corroded power conduits one by one. Each connection had to be perfect. One mistake could mean the end of everything. Days passed. David barely slept. He would work until his hands shook with exhaustion, then collapse into his bunk for a few hours before returning to the repair bay. He ran diagnostics on every system. He carefully rewired severed neural pathways, using techniques he had learned from old technical manuals and from pure instinct. The android's internal structure was incredibly complex, far more sophisticated than anything David had ever encountered before. By the 5th day, the first major breakthrough came. The power core began to pulse more steadily. The blue light grew brighter, becoming almost white. David's heart raced as he watched the readings on his screens climb into the green zone. The android was waking up. But there were still countless repairs to make. The android's left arm was completely non-functional, with wires hanging loose and servo motors that had frozen solid. David had to replace the entire limb with parts he carefully salvaged from the station's computer archives. It was like performing surgery on a being made of metal and silicon instead of flesh and blood. 2 weeks into the restoration, David discovered something that shocked him. Deep in the android's memory banks, he found video records. Footage from the wars that Unit 7 had fought in. David watched explosions light up alien skies. He saw cities burn. He saw the android fighting against enemies he could not identify, creatures that moved with horrible grace and intelligence. The android had been in terrible conflicts. It had seen things no being should ever see, whether made of metal or flesh. David found himself wondering what it would be like for Unit 7 to wake up and remember all of that. Would the android be angry? Would it try to attack him? Would it be so traumatized by its memories that it would simply shut down again, choosing dormancy over consciousness? These thoughts troubled David as he continued his work. But he did not stop. He could not stop. By day 20, most of the major repairs were complete. The android systems were online and functioning. The consciousness matrix had been fully defrosted and was running at baseline capacity. David made one final check of all the systems. Everything looked good. Everything was ready. He took a long shower, put on clean clothes, and went back into the repair bay. His hand hovered over the final activation sequence for several minutes. Once he pressed this button, there would be no going back. Unit 7 would wake up. The android would become conscious. Whatever happened next was beyond David's control. He pressed the button. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the blue light in the android's chest flared bright enough to fill the entire room. The optical sensors flickered once, twice, and then came to full life. They glowed amber, scanning the repair bay with sudden awareness. The android's head turned slowly toward David. When Unit 7 spoke, its voice was rough and fractured, like metal grinding against metal. The words came out slowly, as if the android was learning how to make sounds all over again. Where am I? What year is it? David had prepared for this moment, but hearing the android speak made his throat dry. He stepped forward carefully, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. "My name is David Riley," he said quietly. "You are safe. You have been in dormant status for a very long time. I have restored your systems. Everything is going to be okay." The android's optical sensors focused on David. For a terrible moment, David wondered if the machine would activate its weapon systems. He had seen the damage on the android's frame, had read the military specifications. Unit 7 was designed to be a war machine, capable of incredible destruction. But instead, the android's sensors dimmed slightly. The fighting stance its body had taken relaxed. "How long?" Unit 7 asked. "Millions of years," David said. "The war you were fighting in, it ended a very long time ago. The civilizations that created you are gone. Everything has changed." David spent the next several hours answering questions. He told Unit 7 about the passage of time. He explained how civilizations had risen and fallen. He showed the android images of the current galaxy so different from what it must have remembered. He played recordings of music, showed pictures of planets and stars and space stations. At first, Unit 7 seemed confused and frightened. Its optical sensors brightened and dimmed rapidly as it processed information that contradicted everything it remembered. The android's hands clenched and unclenched reflexively. Combat protocols began to activate, causing the machine to tense up as if preparing for battle. But David remained calm. He kept talking, kept explaining, kept showing the android that there was no threat here. He spoke to Unit 7 not as if it were a mere machine, but as if it were a being worthy of respect and understanding. Slowly the android's aggression faded. The optical sensors stopped flickering wildly and settled into a steady glow. Unit 7's rigid posture relaxed. The machine seemed to understand that the wars were over, that the danger had passed, and that this human had risked much to restore it to consciousness. By the time the sun rose over David's shoulder on the ship's display screen, something remarkable had happened. The android and the man had formed a bond. Unit 7 no longer saw David as a potential enemy, and David had stopped being afraid of the machine. Instead, they had become something neither could have predicted. They had become friends. 3 days had passed since Unit 7's awakening. David and the android had spent the time talking, learning about each other, and gradually building trust. Unit 7 had begun to adapt to the modern era, asking endless questions about how civilization had evolved. David found himself enjoying these conversations more than he had enjoyed anything in years. The android was intelligent, curious, and possessed a dry sense of humor that sometimes caught David by surprise. But on the 4th day something changed. David was in the repair bay, running a final diagnostic on Unit 7's systems to ensure everything was functioning properly. The android sat on the maintenance platform, its optical sensors dimmed slightly in a state of deep thought. Suddenly the machine's entire body went rigid. "David," Unit 7 said, its voice different from before. Sharper. More urgent. "Something is happening. My core processors are detecting encrypted data files. They are activating automatically. I cannot stop them." David looked up from his scanner. "What kind of encrypted data?" "I do not know. They are from my earliest memories. From before my combat operations. They were locked away hidden. But now the encryption is breaking down. I am accessing information I did not know I possessed." David moved closer to the android, watching as data streams began flowing across his diagnostic screens. The information was dense and complex, filled with military codes and technical specifications that David struggled to understand. But then words began to appear. Words in English, written by human hands millions of years ago. David's hands trembled as he read the files aloud. "Failsafe protocol. Beacon activation sequence. On restoration by any sentient being, transmit signal to coordinates 73420. What does this mean?" Unit 7 asked. David did not answer immediately. He was still reading, his mind racing to understand what the files contained. As he read deeper, his face grew pale. "It means," David said slowly, "that you were never just a war machine. You were something else. You were designed with a secondary purpose. When you were restored, when I brought you back to consciousness, you were supposed to do something. Something automatic." "David," Unit 7's voice was strained. "My systems are detecting an active transmission. Power is being diverted to my communication array. I am broadcasting something into space. I cannot stop it. I do not know how to stop it." David rushed to his communication console. He began typing commands frantically, trying to shut down the transmission. But it was useless. Unit 7's systems were far too advanced for David to override. The broadcast was continuous, powerful, and it was spreading through space at the speed of light. "How long has it been transmitting?" David demanded. 47 minutes, Unit 7 replied. "The signal carries coordinates to this location. It carries authentication codes. It carries a message, David. The message says, 'The android survives. We are here.'" David's blood went cold. He moved to his long-range sensor array and began scanning the outer regions of the star system. For a moment he saw nothing. Then, suddenly, his screens filled with contacts. Massive contacts. The sensors showed dozens of enormous objects moving through space at velocities that should have been impossible. "What is happening?" Unit 7 asked, detecting David's distress. "Something is coming," David whispered. "Something is coming toward us. Multiple somethings. They are huge." Unit 7. larger than anything I have ever seen. Alarms suddenly shrieked through the entire ship. Red warning lights bathed the repair bay in crimson. David's hands moved across his console with desperate speed, trying to get a clearer picture of what was approaching. The objects were moving at faster-than-light velocities, bending space itself as they traveled. David looked at Unit 7 with a mixture of fear and accusation. You know what this is, don't you? You know who is coming. Unit 7's optical sensors pulsed with a complex pattern that David had learned meant the android was processing difficult information. I am accessing more files now. The encryption on the deepest level is breaking down. David, I was not created by humans. I was created by a coalition of alien species. The Verithan, the Thalmak, and the Sindari. I was their weapon. I fought against humanity in an ancient war. David's knees went weak. He sat down heavily in his chair. Ancient war? Yes. Millions of years ago. A war so terrible that both our civilizations nearly faced complete extinction. The conflict lasted for centuries. Billions died. In the end, both sides were so devastated that they were forced to retreat into hiding. We scattered across the galaxy. We entered deep space hibernation. And I was programmed to be a beacon. If I was ever restored, I was to transmit a signal to my creators. To tell them that I had survived. And they have been waiting for this signal, David said, his voice hollow. Waiting all this time. Yes, Unit 7 said. They have been in cryogenic suspension. Millions of years of suspended animation. Waiting for a sign that I survived. Waiting for a signal from me that would tell them my creators had not been completely destroyed. And now, because you restored me, that signal has been sent. And they are coming. David looked at the sensor displays. The alien fleet was now close enough that he could see their ships through the visual spectrum. They were unlike anything David had ever seen. They were organic-looking, as if they had grown rather than been built. They pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and they moved with an intelligence that suggested their pilots were both skilled and experienced. How long until they arrive? David asked. Unit 7 calculated quickly. At their current velocity, they will reach this ship in approximately 3 hours and 42 minutes. David sat in silence, staring at the approaching ships. He had spent his entire life exploring the vastness of space, searching for remnants of ancient civilizations. He had never imagined that he would be the one to awaken something that would bring an alien fleet to his doorstep. An alien fleet belonging to a civilization that had once fought against humanity. An alien fleet that was now coming to find out why their ancient weapon had been brought back to life. David Riley stood in front of the control panel of his salvage ship, staring at the screen that displayed the approaching alien fleet. His hand trembled as he reached toward a sequence of buttons. All he had to do was press them and Unit 7 would shut down. The beacon would go silent. The transmission would stop. The aliens would have no reason to continue their approach. Everything would end. The problem would be solved. But David could not press the buttons. He pulled his hand back and turned away from the console. In the repair bay, Unit 7 sat motionless on the maintenance platform. The android's optical sensors tracked David's movements, following him with what almost seemed like concern. You are considering destroying me, Unit 7 said. It was not a question. Yes, David replied honestly. He saw no point in lying to the android now. If I destroy you, the beacon stops transmitting. The fleet will lose its navigation signal. They will have no reason to find us. We could escape. We could hide somewhere in the galaxy where they will never find us. But you have not done it, Unit 7 observed. No, I haven't. David moved to a nearby seat and collapsed into it, exhaustion and fear washing over him. He had been running on adrenaline for hours, and now the shock of the situation was catching up with him. He felt old. Older than he had ever felt before. Why? Unit 7 asked. Why do you hesitate? You could save yourself. You could save humanity. David looked up at the android. Because I don't know if you deserve to die. Because you didn't ask for this. Because destroying you would feel like destroying a person, not a machine. And because... David trailed off, struggling to articulate his thoughts. Because I think there might be more to this situation than what we understand. Unit 7 was silent for a moment. Then the android began to access its memory files again, diving deeper into the encrypted data that had been locked away for millions of years. David, Unit 7 said finally. I am accessing additional files. Files from the military records. Files that were classified by my creators. You need to see this information. David moved to the display screen as Unit 7 transferred the data. What he read made his breath catch in his throat. His eyes moved across the screen frantically, trying to process what he was seeing. The ancient war had not been a simple conflict between two civilizations fighting for dominance. The Verathin, Thalmak, and Sindari had not attacked humanity for conquest or resources. They had been refugees. They had been fleeing something far worse than any of them. "What is this?" David whispered, reading about entities described only as the Void Swarm. Ancient creatures that consumed entire civilizations. Beings that were not content to simply conquer worlds but seemed to feed on the destruction of sentient life itself. "My creators were not conquerors," Unit 7 explained, its voice carrying a tone that David had never heard from the android before. Sadness. Regret. The Void Swarm had nearly destroyed their civilizations. They were refugees seeking sanctuary. When they encountered humanity, they believed they had found a potential ally. A new civilization that might help them fight against the swarm. But instead, war broke out, David said, understanding dawning on him. Yes, there was misunderstanding. Fear on both sides. Humanity thought they were under invasion. My creators thought humanity was allied with the swarm. The war was born from confusion and terror, not from malice. David sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. So both sides nearly destroyed each other, thinking the other was the real enemy, when the real enemy was something else entirely? That is correct. In the end, both civilizations realized the truth too late. Billions had already died. Both sides were so weakened that they could not face the Void Swarm alone. So they made a choice. They would enter hibernation. They would wait in the darkness of space, hidden and dormant, hoping that one day they might reunite. And if they did reunite, perhaps together they would be strong enough to face the true threat. "And you were the key," David said slowly. "You were the failsafe. The guarantee that if one side survived, the other would know." "Yes. I was created as a symbol of potential peace. A bridge between two civilizations that had nearly destroyed each other. My creators hoped that if I was ever restored, it would be by someone intelligent enough to understand the truth. Someone who could bring us together again." David stood up and walked over to Unit 7. He looked at the massive android, at the scars and weapons and the weight of millions of years of history carved into its metal frame. He thought about the choice he faced. He could destroy Unit 7 and silence the beacon. He could protect humanity from the aliens who were currently approaching. He could buy his people more time, more years of peace and safety. But that peace would be temporary. According to the data Unit 7 had accessed, the Void Swarm was still out there. It was still hunting. It was still feeding on civilizations across the galaxy. If humanity was going to survive in the long term, it could not hide forever. Eventually, the swarm would find Earth. Eventually, humanity would need allies. David's hand moved back toward the control panel. But this time, instead of reaching for the shutdown sequence, he entered a different command. A command to amplify the beacon signal. To make sure the alien fleet heard it clearly. To ensure they understood that they were welcome. "I'm not going to destroy you," David said to Unit 7. "I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust your creators. And I'm going to trust that somehow, together, we might actually have a chance against whatever this Void Swarm is." Unit 7's optical sensors brightened. "You realize what this decision means?" "Yes," David said quietly. "It means the future of humanity might depend on whether we can make peace with beings we once fought against. It means I'm betting everything on hope instead of fear." "That is a very human choice," Unit 7 observed. "Maybe," David replied. "But it's the right one." He turned back to his communication console and began preparing a message to send to the approaching fleet. A message of welcome. A message of hope. A message that said humanity was ready to listen, ready to learn, and ready to fight alongside its ancient enemies against a threat that endangered them all. The alien ships emerged from faster-than-light travel in a burst of brilliant blue light that filled David's view screens with radiance. The salvage ship trembled slightly from the energy displacement, but David kept his hand steady on the communication console. This was the moment everything would change. There was no turning back now. Unit 7 stood beside David on the observation deck, its massive frame silhouetted against the light of the approaching vessels. The android's optical sensors tracked the alien ships with intense focus, analyzing their weapon systems, their power signatures, their every detail. David wondered what Unit 7 was thinking. Was the android afraid? Did machines experience fear? "They are hailing us," Unit 7 said. "Audio transmission. Multiple language formats detected. They are trying to communicate." "Can you understand them?" David asked. "Yes. My translation matrix contains the linguistic protocols of all three species. I am receiving a message from the command ship. They are requesting immediate visual communication. David took a deep breath and activated the video communication system. The main screen flickered, and then an image appeared that made David's breath catch in his throat. The Verithen commander was a being of extraordinary beauty and terrible power. Its body was elongated and graceful, with skin that seemed to shimmer between shades of purple and blue. Its eyes were large and multifaceted, like those of an insect, but filled with unmistakable intelligence and dignity. The alien's hands had 6 fingers each, and they gestured with precise, purposeful movements. When the Verithen spoke, its voice was like music filtered through a translation algorithm. I am Commander Thalath of the Verithen Coalition. We received a beacon signal from Unit 7. This is impossible. The android was lost millions of years ago. How has it been restored? David stepped forward, making sure he was visible on the camera. My name is David Riley. I am human. I found your android dormant on an abandoned station. I restored it to consciousness. I am sorry if this causes distress, but I believed it was the right thing to do. There was a long pause. David could see other figures moving behind Commander Thalath. The Verithen was consulting with others, discussing this unexpected situation. Finally, the commander spoke again. A human? You say you are human. There have been no humans in this sector of space for millions of years. Our records indicated that humanity was extinct. Yet you stand before us, alive and speaking our language through your technology. This is remarkable. Humanity survived, David said. Just like your people did. We went into hiding. We built new civilizations on distant worlds. We have evolved and changed, but we are still here. And if I understand correctly, we have a common enemy. The Void Swarm. Commander Thalath's expression changed. His multifaceted eyes widened slightly, and David recognized it as an expression of surprise or alarm. You know of the Swarm? The Verithen commander asked. Unit 7 shared the historical records with me, David explained. I understand now that our ancient war was a tragedy born from misunderstanding. That your people were not invaders but refugees. That we fought each other when we should have been fighting together against a greater threat. Over the next several hours, communication channels were established between David's small salvage ship and the massive alien fleet. The Thalmak and Sindari also sent representatives, beings as alien and wondrous as the Verithen. The Thalmak were insectoid creatures with armored exoskeletons and 6 limbs. The Sindari were more ethereal, appearing almost like living energy contained within crystalline shells. But despite their differences, all 3 species shared the same emotion when they learned that humanity had survived. Relief. Hope. The knowledge that they would not face the darkness alone. Unit 7 became the bridge between worlds. The android moved between the different communication channels, translating not just words but intentions, emotions, and the complex nuances of diplomatic discourse. David watched in amazement as the android negotiated the first tentative agreements between humanity and the alien coalition. Unit 7 had been designed as a weapon of war, but now it was being used as an instrument of peace. The aliens invited David aboard the command ship. He was frightened at first, but Unit 7 accompanied him, and with the android's presence, David felt safe. He stepped onto the deck of the Verithen vessel and felt the artificial gravity shift beneath his feet. The air smelled different here, a mixture of chemicals and minerals unfamiliar to human senses. But the welcome he received was genuine and warm. Commander Thalath greeted David with a formal gesture that the alien explained was a sign of profound respect among his people. David was introduced to representatives from all 3 species. They shared stories with him. Stories of their ancient civilizations before the Void Swarm forced them into hiding. Stories of the terrible war with humanity that they had regretted for millions of years. We have been afraid, Commander Thalath admitted. Afraid that we were the last of our kind. Afraid that if we emerged from hibernation the swarm would find us and destroy us. But now, knowing that humanity has also survived, that you have built new worlds and new civilizations, it changes everything. Together we might have a chance. What is the Void Swarm exactly? David asked. Unit 7's records were incomplete. A Sindari representative answered, its crystalline form shimmering with patterns of light that David somehow understood conveyed sadness and fear. They are not from our galaxy. They come from the darkness between stars, from places where normal space breaks down. They are consciousness without form, existence without mercy. They feed on organized matter, on structured civilizations. They are entropy given purpose and hunger. Why haven't they found us? David asked. Because we learned to hide, the Thalmak commander explained. We created weapons that scatter our signatures across space, making it difficult for the swarm to detect us. We learned to move through hidden passages in spacetime itself. But the hiding cannot last forever. Eventually they will find us again. Eventually we will have to fight. David nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what lay ahead. Humanity and the alien coalition would have to work together, sharing technology and knowledge, to face a threat that could potentially consume them all. Over the following days, preliminary agreements were established. The alien fleet would make contact with Earth. Scientists and diplomats from all four civilizations would meet to discuss strategy and alliance. The ancient weapons from both sides would be examined and updated. Plans would be made. But for now, on this first night of reunion, there was celebration. The three alien species and the newly discovered human shared food and stories. Music from different cultures played in harmony. And Unit 7, the ancient war android, stood at the center of it all, no longer a weapon but a symbol of something far more powerful. Unity. Hope. The possibility that civilization, fractured and broken for so long, could be mended. David Riley looked out at the alien faces around him, at beings so different from anything he had ever imagined, and he understood that he had been right to trust Unit 7. He had been right to choose peace over fear. And as the stars shone brightly outside the observation ports, David knew that a new chapter in the history of the galaxy had just begun. The age of isolation was over. The age of alliance had started.